Hello, and thank you for joining us for the Child Care Business Coach. My name is Evelyn Knight, and today I am so excited about the guest I have. I am joined by Liz Huntley, who wrote one of my favorite books that I was telling Liz before we started this, that is actually a required reading for my staff. So, Liz, do you want to go ahead and introduce yourself?
Sure. My name is Liz Huntley, and I consider myself an attorney by trade, but a child advocate by triumph. And when I say by triumph is I'm really the why behind why early childhood is so important. In addition to being a lawyer and a child advocate, author, and speaker, I'm also a mom, which is my most important job. And I have a 22-year-old, 20-year-old, and a 7-year-old.
Wow.
So we call that a caboose, right? And I am just very excited to be here.
Great. And I should clarify, you have more than one book, but the book that I actually require my staff to read is More Than a Bird.
Yes.
I'm excited too, because you are one of the keynote speakers at my conference, the Child Care Business Summit. And before we started, I was telling you that I am on a mission to change early childhood education, that we really need to make sure that all children have access to quality care and education.
Absolutely.
And I believe that we can change the world. Right now, we are looking at a world that is in such turmoil. And I know here in the United States, we kind of hyper focus here, but this is a worldwide problem, not just the United States. But if we really just focus on the children and making sure that we're giving them those skills they need for the future, we can change the world. And you are a perfect testament to that. I tell my staff that, we're working right now with the before in the classrooms, but you are a testament of the after of what we want to accomplish.
Right. So it literally saved my life. There's no doubt about it that early childhood education, had it not been present, I would not be on this podcast. It was so impactful.
Yeah. Can you tell us a little bit about, I know we don't have a lot of time, but just kind of tell us a little bit about your story.
Yeah, just so the 30-second version is I was born in a home where my parents were drug dealers. Mom and dad were drug dealers. We lived in a housing project in an urban area in Alabama, and there were 5 of us in the house, 5 children, 4 different daddies. Mom had given birth to us from 16 to 21. You do the math, and just a very dysfunctional situation, all kind of chaos and people and guns and drugs and money and, in that environment. And when I was 5, my dad got busted for dealing drugs and went to prison. And while he was in prison, as my mom was trying to hold down the drug business herself, she started using their product heroin and became an addict. So she eventually committed suicide, split us up amongst relatives right before she did the act of committing suicide. And the home that I ended up in with my grandmother, I was sexually abused within a month of being in there after my mom's death, faced hunger, insecurity over the course of my childhood, ended up in and out of foster homes, all of those kinds of things. But it was the stabilizing source of, it started with the early childhood education, which was essential, that set the foundation for it to then be the K through 12 experience. And my little book, More Than a Bird, which I actually wrote for middle school kids, I had no idea that adults that's why it's so easy to read, because I wrote it on a middle school level, and it's used by lots of middle schools to let every child know that no matter what circumstance you're in, as long as you're in a school, there's an adult in there that cares, and you have hope, and you have an opportunity for a better quality of life.
Right. I love in the book how you really paint the perfect picture about how the skills you learned in your early childhood classroom actually made you successful through elementary school. I love what you talk about your introduction to elementary school and how simple it was that you were, because of the skills you learned, which we take for granted when we live in this world of ECE, we take for granted these things that ended up like helping you succeed and thrive in the public school system.
Yes. So, so often when we think about school, we think about a grade. We think about, whether we've gone from point A to point B in a curriculum. We think about those things that are important because they are part of the academic excellence side of things. But what's just as important, especially in an early childhood setting, is just practical skills. Everything from self-regulation to working in a group to learning how to concentrate and be still for a period of time, to navigating in spaces within a building, to learning to share, and all of those things that so many people sort of assume kids just sort of get when they're home. Well, a lot of kids are at home by themselves. They don't have other siblings. They're staying with a grandma or whatever that's kind of letting them do whatever they want to do. I mean, there's so much going on. And I was one of the kids where not only was there not a lot going on, but there were bad things going on too. So the buffer of being in that nurturing environment, as with your neuroscience background, that was really critical to, to even my brain development at that time. But it's just a way for a child to learn how to flourish and become resilient. A lot of people think that resilience is something we're just born with.
No.
And I do think that there's some people that might have a little tougher skin than others, relatively speaking. But for the most part, and we know this in science, that resilience is built. It's instilled. The ability to overcome comes from the different circumstances and experiences we have in life. And I can say in my early childhood environment, the ladies, as nurturing and loving as they were also challenging. They had high expectations, and they did it, they tempered with love in doing that, and learning the things that I learned and the practical experiences I had, and pushing me to push myself even, was really critical, to me being able to thrive and do as well as I did when I went to public school.
Absolutely. And again, if you look at the world and our education system, America, we're really falling behind in the United States. But if you look at the best, which I love to look at Finland's their education system, because it is number one in the world.
It is.
And they don't even begin the academics until children are 7 years old.
Yep.
They are solely focused on the social, emotional development of children until the age of 7. And what we miss so often is exactly what you're talking about. When we put those, they're called the executive brain functions. That is what is built in the first 5 years of life, which is what the coping skills, problem solving, time management, how you self-regulate. All of that is formed in those first 5 years. So when we prioritize that, we can really help children to thrive under the types of circumstances you are in, and it helps to break those generational cycles.
Absolutely. I often look at it as, expecting a kid to run a mile race and they never even walked a mile.
Yeah.
Like, how do you expect them to do that?
I so agree.
How do you expect them to, if that endurance hasn't been built, if the stamina hasn't been built, the tools, the learning how to breathe, and all of those things that you need to be able to do in order to run a mile? Well, going to school is no different, right? I mean, in order to, I remember the very first time when I got involved in Alabama as an advocate for a high quality early childhood for children. I'll never forget, it was in a pediatrician's office that we were placing in the pediatrician's offices across the state. And I had small children at the time, and I saw what is expected according to school curricula standards for children to understand and know how to do when they walk into kindergarten.
Yeah.
And I looked at it, and here I'm educated. My husband's he's an educator, I'm married to an educator. And I look at this list and I think, we got a lot of work to do. Like, I didn't realize that there's sort of the curricula and the way that, public education and even private to some extent, in terms of what's expected of kindergarten and first grade children, there's a lot that you're supposed to walk in the door with, know, and much of it has nothing to do with academics, but with more where they are developmentally.
Exactly. And that's something we miss so often in ECE. we look at what is commercialized, and I like to call it parent pleasers, right? We look at these
Mhm.
parent pleasers where the parents think they want their children, in front of flashcards and photocopied sheets,
I
but that
love
is
that term, parent pleasers.
they're
That's so
parent please. That's what I
language.
call them. I just call them. I teach my staff at my childcare center that well, first of all, I educate my parents, and then I teach my staff. I don't buy into parent pleasers. I want to do what's best for these children. My job as an early childhood educator is to make sure that I am giving these children the skills that they need to succeed, not only in their K through 12 journey, but as an adult. It
Mhm.
isn't to make sure they know their ABCs and one, two, threes. And math and literacy, of course, it has its place. But my number one concern is their social emotional development, because the academics come, they do, but those foundational pieces, they don't always come so easily once the child hits 6 years old. It is so much harder
It
to
is.
really, yeah, to bring that into their life. So my mother immigrated to the United States from Honduras.
Mhm.
So I too have had the honor of breaking generational chains. I am the first of actually even high school graduate, and
Wow.
then beyond in my but my mom fought so hard for that, to make sure that I got there. So that is part of the reason I too have a passion for just helping these children to break generational chains. But let's talk a little bit about like the world around us right now and what we're seeing, and how we can really help change the world by helping children to be more empathetic, to really just be more reasonable and more loving, and just more kind in general.
Absolutely. In fact, I have such a passion about that I started a nonprofit 5 years ago, and we've served over 125 schools in Alabama, more than 50,000 kids, called the Hope Institute.
Oh,
And
nice.
what we do is we help schools build a culture of character uh,
Oh,
that addresses those very issues. Students being empathetic, students just being kind,
yes.
students being service oriented and recognizing obligation to sense of community, and sort of building these caring communities. And schools participate from middle schools to elementaries with pre-K through third grade, whoever wants to sign up and participate in the program. And the good thing about early childhood education is that part is built in, where we're
Yes.
trying to build it into K-12. That's a part of the curriculum, is understanding all of these things surrounding the whole child, and not just
Yes.
the brain on a stick.
Exactly. Their children aren't trophies. That's my other catchphrase. Is like, these children aren't our trophies. I don't care about shoving so much information. I want them to be functional adults.
Right.
But one of the things too that I'm really passionate about in my programs, and one of the things we can accomplish in early childhood education, is before they even get to that elementary school level, if we help children just understand and be like being exposed to children of different socioeconomic status.
Right.
I guess it's breaking that segregation is what I'm really trying to achieve, where a lot of times you'll see like children in this income level, they're over here. And
Right.
this income level is over here. And then you have like just all the differences are segregated. So then when they come into the public school system, suddenly they're just at a point where they're like, wait a second, that child is different than me.
Two different worlds.
Yeah, and even when it comes to special needs, also at my program, I take every child, period, so that when they don't, it raises children in a way where it's just normal, so they don't see so much of a difference. And the differences we do want them to see, we teach them how to honor it. We
Right.
really teach them how to, like, it's a good thing sometimes. Yes, we are different, but that is wonderful. There's nothing wrong with it. And
So
that's
you are
another.
so aligned with that concept in Alabama in our early childhood programming, because for our high quality pre-K classrooms, it's a lottery.
Oh,
It is a
nice.
total lottery. So even me with my son, I wasn't sure if he was going to get in. His name was drawn, but because there's only so much access, we're more than 40% access of voluntary high quality pre-K in the state of Alabama now. And we're phasing it in over time so that the workforce can grow with the amount of children that are being served. But, the whole concept behind the lottery of who gets to get into the classroom is really doing exactly what you're talking about, even to the point of, going out of our way. We have a large Hispanic community in the state of Alabama. We're an agricultural state, quite frankly. And so, making sure things are in Spanish,
Yes.
doing all the things that we need to do to make sure we're reaching out to every member of our community so that they understand what's available to their children and they'll enroll themselves in the lottery, to have an
Yeah.
opportunity to be able to get into it. So we have a very diverse mix of students that we serve, not only a diverse mix of students, but diverse delivery as well, because
Mhm.
it's available in whether it's a faith-based school, a public school, a private child care facility. So there's different ways in which kids can be served, because 4-year-olds are everywhere.
They are.
Birth
Yeah.
to 4-year-olds are everywhere. And
Yes.
sometimes we have to meet them where they are.
I 100% agree. And just making sure that all children have the opportunity to
Mhm.
really just form that growing brain, since 90% of their brain are growing in the first 5 years.
Right.
It's so important for us to make sure that they all have that equal opportunity to grow that healthy brain.
That's correct.
Yeah. So I think it's wonderful too for caregivers to really understand too just how, even if you don't have the opportunity, I know a lot of people, you may be a director who your owner is just set on this is how it is, or I have a lot of in my audience who are church based,
Mhm.
so they don't really have the opportunity to do what I've done, but there's always that child and that you just don't know that needs you. And so showing up because I'm sure your teachers when you were in preschool, they may not have known what was really happening behind
No,
closed
they did not.
doors.
They had
Yeah,
no idea. But they also had no idea what an impact they were having on my life
mhm.
either.
Right, because because they were authentic. They
Mhm.
showed up authentic, they truly cared, they had the heart.
Right.
And that's what was important. I also love in your book how you talk about how you remember your teachers, which is, I don't know, one of my fears always, because I take care of such little kids, is they're never going to remember me. I mean, I work so hard for them, but I love that you point out that you actually really just you remember them and their impact and how they showed you love. What is it about them that makes you remember them so clearly?
Well, the gratitude for the role that they played in my life, and it's not even as much about sort of the academic foundation
Yeah.
that's obviously served me well, with the opportunities it's afforded me, but, just the stabilizing place that they had in my life. Sometimes I talk all over the country with my story, and my favorite thing, no offense to the adults in your conference, is to talk with kids, right?
Hmm.
Because it's like what you were talking about earlier before we started, which is this preventive idea.
Yes.
What if we can get to them early to head off some of the things that are ahead of them in terms of bad choices? And I had a young lady in a inner city school, 7th grade. They had read my book as a part of their reading, and I came and did a book talk with them, in their gym,
Oh.
and created an opportunity for them to ask me any question they wanted to ask me, and we just had a discussion. And a young lady said to me, she said, I just don't get it. I don't get it, Miss Liz. Like, there's no way I couldn't go through all that stuff. I just don't understand. How did you make it? Like, how did you
Yeah.
make it? And it was such an authentic and raw question,
Yes.
coming from a kid. And she really wanted to kind of wrap her mind around it because she couldn't begin to process it. And it stumped me for a second. And I thought about it and I was like, you know what? I want you to think about it like this. And I try to remind healthy schools how they save the life of hurting kids. Because if you think about it, let's think about time. And this is what I explained to the little girl. I said, when I would get off the bus at home after school, which was about 3:30, 40, almost 4 o'clock by the time I walked in the door. never knowing what was going to happen. Would I be sexually abused? Will we have food? Is
Yeah.
my uncle going to be violent? Are we going to end up sitting in a 72-hour hearing, for juvenile court or whatever, never knowing what would happen from day to day. And so obviously cortisol would be released, right?
Yeah.
That bad guy that
Yep.
puts you in fight or flight situation, and anything could happen. Sometimes nothing happened, sometimes things did. But eventually I would go to bed, and I went to bed around 9 o'clock. So when you think about 4 to 9, that's
Yes.
5 hours. So
Yeah.
then I went to sleep to shut it off, right? And I slept all night, and I woke up in the morning, even though who knows what I might have dealt with for, between breakfast and getting to the bus stop. But I woke up with hope because I was about to spend the next 8 hours at my school.
Yes.
I was about to spend the next 8 hours at a happy place where, my mind was stimulated to learn. No adults hurt me. I knew I was going to have a meal. I actually felt like a child in that place where I felt safe and happy and healthy and stimulated. So just sort of the hope of knowing that I was about to go to what was my happy place. And
Yeah.
I was going to be there all day. So even though I had to endure what I had to endure from 4 to say 9 o'clock at night, whatever that happened to be, look at the rest of my time. It was either sleeping or being in my school. And, and knowing that is what kept me going so many times. And, and of course, the reason I named the book More Than a Bird was because, school became sort of the safe place and the thing that got me through. And then I would be remiss if I didn't mention my faith. And then, because of school and being able to read, I went to a service and started understanding the power of God and profess Christ. And so then the complement of having church outside of school, the two of those things were
Right.
really the things that buffered me from the bad stuff, because nothing changed in my house. The sexual abuse, all of that stuff continued to go on all throughout, my childhood. But those respites, if you will. So think about that. It was like, when you're in a positive place, the good hormones,
Yeah.
start to come around, right?
Yep.
And the bad hormones go away. So it's like healing.
Yeah.
It's almost like you have a bad negative situation, but you get up the next morning and you got a long day of this
Right.
positive stuff that's happening. So it's like you're being restored every day. And that's how I got through it.
Well, and what's interesting about what you're saying too is that when you're going through trauma can actually literally reform the brain. I mean, the
Absolutely.
physical functions of the brain, but having those times of respite was when your brain had that time to rest. Right. If we
Exactly.
don't, we forget that our brain is just another muscle. And if we don't give our brain that time to recover and to rest, it actually leads to brain damage. And
Absolutely.
that is it's so interesting because as you're saying that, I realized, well, wow, that is how you didn't have that permanent damage, is
Exactly.
because you're basically the exposure to a healthy early childhood education program, and then your those positive moments in your life, and having those 8 hours, even though we think of it as, well, she was at school though, but it still gave your brain enough time to rest that today you actually have a brain that can function and doesn't have that permanent damage.
And even before I moved in with my grandmother, after my mother committed suicide, there was a child care facility that we went to on a regular
Oh,
basis. That was, so even in those really early years, there was sort of and I remember the building. It was across the street from the housing project, and, a positive experience. So that was always present.
yeah,
It wasn't as, because I sort of had that, what I call childhood oblivion, when I was in the midst of the dysfunction of the drugs and everything, because I had no idea that it was dysfunctional. It was my normal. And
yeah,
Maslow's laws
yep,
were being met. I mean, I had food, I had shelter. I didn't know my siblings had different daddies. I didn't care. I loved everybody, played with my
yeah.
toys. And I just was used to the stuff going on around me, right? And so I really wasn't, as odd as it sounds, in the midst of all of that dysfunction, I really didn't experience real trauma until my mother committed suicide and we were separated, and I
Right.
began, and so, but here's what I do want to point out, and I know we're getting close to time, is when I wrote the book, I wanted to know sort of what I was like when all of that happened with my
Okay.
mother, and
Right.
what was my personality like, and all of those things. And I interviewed a lot of elderly ladies in my community, and I'll sum it up with one. She said, "Oh, baby, it was so sad." She said, "You just walked all slumped over. You didn't look
Oh.
up at people. It was like you were in a shell." She said, you mumbled when you talk. We used to have to tell you to speak up, and, we used
Mm.
to look people in the face. And she said, "But baby, after a while, you just snapped out of it." She said, "You
Oh,
just
wow.
snapped out of it and everything was fine. You did great in school. You got a college scholarship and went to law school." She's like, "Baby, we're so proud of you." Well, I didn't just snap out of it.
Yeah.
No child has that capacity.
Yes.
And what do we know in neuroscience about what starts to happen, how children start to manifest that this trauma is impacting brain development? We know they lose their posture. We
Yep.
know they become withdrawn. We know that they don't make eye contact. We know that they stop speaking. Some of them become absolutely mute when
Hmm.
it's that severe. Well, that's what was
That
happening to
regression.
me.
Yes.
I mean, I was literally going into a complete
Yeah.
shutdown.
Yeah.
And then I went to that preschool and
Wow.
walked in there, this withdrawn child, hurt, vulnerable, all these things, and walked out of that school with a smile on my face and a valedictorian medallion around my neck.
Right.
And nothing changed in my house.
Wow. Yeah. So
It was just the
powerful.
powerful of that. So that's why I say I'm a walking testament to, the impact of that sort of an environment on a child, especially when they're experiencing trauma. The impact is great whether the child's in a thriving environment, right? I mean, every child needs access to high quality early childhood
Yes.
care. Every child deserves that. I made sure my children had it.
Right.
But when you're talking about a child who's a victim, a child of trauma, it's everything.
It's
It's
imperative.
life changing.
Yeah.
It's life changing.
Right. Well, I hope everybody listening just plays that again. And I really want you to really just take away this is the impact you have. We become so complacent on a day to day basis that we forget the power that we have in these children's lives. And what you just said is exactly why I know that we can change the world through early childhood education. And that's why I'm on this mission to really just help other educators and the leaders in early childhood to see this is what we can do. And even if you're in an affluent neighborhood, you don't know. We have no idea what is happening behind the closed doors in a child's life. Sometimes the children who are withstanding the worst abuse are the last ones you would ever suspect.
Yeah, can I just interject on that?
Absolutely.
You hit a home run with that statement. I served as a guardian ad litem for abused and neglected children for 8 years during the course of my career. And during that time, I learned intimately more than I ever cared to know about how childhood trauma does not discriminate. It
Yes,
does not care what
does
color
not.
you are. It does not care how big your house is and what your bank account looks like. Dysfunction and unhealthy relationships and dynamics for children exist no matter what clothing and car and all of those things that they have that may give the appearance that everything's wonderful because the material things the material needs are being met. The parents seem to have it together and are, affluent or employed and those types of things. And you're exactly right. The things that I learned about, how children, especially in those situations, really suffer in silence, because of the image around their family and who they
Yes.
are and all of those kinds of things. And they really hide and suppress a lot of
They
those
hide.
things.
That's my story. That was me. My father was very wealthy. My mother immigrated here. He found her, married her, but he was a very abusive, controlling man. very wealthy. I mean, he had dinner with senators and nobody knew what was happening behind closed doors. My mother was very good at playing the role. Everybody thought we were the perfect family and had no idea the horrors that were happening at night at my house.
Right.
And we were trained very well as children to play the part too, and to put on these brilliant masks that,
Right.
yep. And so, yes, you don't know. We don't know who we're caring for and who needs that love. And as long as we just show up and put their best interest first and be authentic, that's all they need from us. It's just that love and the guidance and really just putting them first.
Yes, because every child has a story behind their
Mhm.
eyes.
Yes.
They all do. And some of them have a beautiful story behind their eyes where the role you're playing is just a compliment, to what they've already been so blessed with. And some of them have the type of story behind their eyes where the role you play is life changing. It
Absolutely.
becomes the thing that gets them through.
Yes. Well, thank you so much, Liz. It has just been such an honor. I cannot wait to meet you in person.
I'm looking forward to it. It's going to be great.
Isn't Liz absolutely amazing? I hope you get to meet her and hear her speak live at the Child Care Business Summit. I am so excited for her to be there and just to give her a hug. I mean, she's inspired me so much in the work that I do that I just feel so passionate about having her there because she sees the need also for the ECE revolution. So this is the one thing that you need to make it to this year. It is just imperative to be at the Child Care Business Summit so that you can get to that next level, so you can become the high level leader that you dream of being, so you can really just take control of your life. One of the things I've really come to realize over the last year is that it really does start with your just leveling up your mind. It's everything, not just increasing your knowledge, but increasing you. So if you're ready to just become that next level person, if you're tired of being stuck, or if you are a next level person who wants to be around more like-minded people, come to the summit so you can meet more people like you. Remember, you are the 5 people you spend the most time around. So open your horizons. Start spending time around higher quality people. Be at the Child Care Business Summit. Have a great rest of your week, everybody.